I still remember the moment everything shattered. It was Melissa's birthday, and I had driven across town with her favorite flowers, only to find her and my brother Daniel locked in an embrace on her front porch. Just 3 weeks earlier, he had convinced her I was cheating, showing her evidence he had fabricated himself. She believed him without question, ending our 2-year relationship with a slap across my face. Then she fell right into his waiting arms, exactly as he had planned. What neither of them knew was that the truth was already unraveling, threatening to expose the web of lies my own brother had spun. Before I share how this betrayal unfolded and the shocking way the truth finally came to light, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you have ever been blindsided by someone you trusted. Completely. Daniel and I grew up as the only 2 children in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Ohio. Just 14 months apart, we were often mistaken for twins when we were younger, both inheriting our father's height and our mother's blue eyes. Despite our physical similarities, our personalities could not have been more different. I was the cautious, responsible older brother who followed rules and planned ahead. Daniel was charming, spontaneous, and constantly testing boundaries, with a remarkable ability to talk his way out of trouble. From our earliest years, a pattern emerged that would define our relationship. Daniel would get into a predicament, whether breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball or failing a class he had neglected to study for, and I would step in to help fix the situation. I covered for him with our parents, tutored him through difficult subjects, and even took the blame occasionally to spare him consequences. This was not entirely selfless. I knew that my parents worried more about Daniel's future than mine, and keeping him out of serious trouble seemed like my unspoken responsibility. "You need to look out for your brother," my father would remind me. "He does not think things through the way you do." Our parents reinforced this dynamic, praising me for my dependability while giving Daniel second and third chances. They attributed his behavior to his creative spirit and passionate nature phrases that seemed to justify the double standard in our household. While I received acknowledgement for my achievements, Daniel received attention for simply participating. This imbalance created a complex relationship between us, one where I simultaneously protected and resented him. In high school, our paths diverged further. I joined the debate team and focused on academics, setting my sights on college scholarships. Daniel became popular through sports and an effortless social charm that drew people to him. Girls who would barely speak to me would light up when Daniel entered a room. While I worked part-time jobs to save for college, Daniel received a car for his 16th birthday, after promising to improve his grades, a promise he never fulfilled. Despite the inequities, we maintained a brotherhood that, while strained at times, seemed unbreakable. I believed that Daniel, for all his flaws, would always have my back, just as I had his. When I left for state university, while Daniel stayed in town attending community college, our relationship actually improved. The distance gave us space to appreciate each other, and our weekend hangouts when I came home became something I looked forward to. It was during my junior year of college that I met Melissa Turner in my American literature class. With warm brown eyes and a quiet confidence, she stood out from the moment she challenged the professor's interpretation of Hemingway during our first session. We were paired for a presentation, and our academic partnership quickly evolved into friendship, then cautious romance. Unlike the brief relationships I had experienced before, my connection with Melissa felt substantial and grounded. She was thoughtful and direct, never playing the kinds of social games that had always confused me. We shared a love of old bookstores, documentary films, and long conversations about everything from philosophy to our favorite breakfast cereals. For the first time, I experienced what it meant to be truly known and accepted by someone outside my family. When I brought Melissa home during spring break to meet my parents and Daniel, I was nervous but hopeful. My parents welcomed her warmly, particularly impressed by her plans to pursue a master's degree in education. Daniel's reaction was harder to read. He was charming as always, telling embarrassing stories about my childhood that made Melissa laugh. But I noticed something calculating in the way he watched her when she was not looking in his direction. "She is way too pretty for you, bro," he said after she had left that evening. "How did you pull that off?" The comment bothered me more than it should have, perhaps because it echoed my own insecurities. Melissa was not only beautiful but accomplished and kind-hearted. Sometimes I did wonder what she saw in me though she never gave me reason to doubt her feelings. As our relationship deepened over the next year, Melissa became a central part of my life. We moved into a small apartment off campus after graduation, both finding jobs in the city. I began working at a publishing company while she taught at a local high school. We talked about marriage as an eventuality, something we both wanted after establishing our careers. Daniel, meanwhile, had dropped out of community college and was working a series of retail jobs while trying to launch a career as a musician. He had always been talented with a guitar, but lacked the discipline to develop his skills consistently. When he was between apartments, which happened frequently, he would crash on our couch for days or weeks, despite my growing discomfort with these arrangements. It was during one of these stays that I first noticed a shift in dynamics. Daniel would engage Melissa in long conversations when I was busy or at work, positioning himself as someone who truly understood her artistic side in ways that I, with my more practical nature, supposedly could not. He would make comments about how Melissa deserved someone who could match her creative energy or appreciate her spirit. When I mentioned these observations to Melissa, she laughed them off. "Your brother is just being friendly," she assured me. "He is probably lonely and needs someone to talk to." Her compassion was one of the qualities I loved most about her, but in this case it prevented her from seeing what was becoming increasingly clear. To me, Daniel's friendly interest was evolving into something more deliberate and concerning. The breaking point came during a weekend when I had to travel for a publishing conference. Daniel, between apartments again, was staying with us, and I had reluctantly left him and Melissa alone for 3 days. I trusted Melissa completely, but my trust in Daniel had been slowly eroding as I observed his behavior around her. During the conference, Melissa's texts became increasingly distant. By the final day, she stopped responding altogether. Concerned, I called several times, only to reach her voicemail. I even contacted her friend Amber, who awkwardly told me she had not heard from Melissa that day, but would ask her to call me. I arrived home Sunday evening to find Melissa packing a suitcase, her eyes red from crying. When I asked what was happening, she turned to me with a coldness I had never seen before. "I know about her, Jason," she said, her voice breaking. "I know about Amanda. The name meant nothing to me. Amanda, I do not know any Amanda." "Stop lying," Melissa shouted, throwing a printed photo toward me. It showed a blonde woman I had never seen before, sitting close to someone whose face was just out of frame but wearing a jacket that looked like mine. Daniel showed me everything. The text messages, the photos, even the hotel receipt from when you were supposedly at your conference. "How could you do this to us?" Stunned, I tried to process what was happening. "Melissa, I swear to you, I have never cheated. I do not know who this woman is or how Daniel got these photos, but none of this is real. He warned me you would deny it," she continued, zipping the suitcase closed. "He said you have done this before, that you have always kept secrets. I just never wanted to believe you could lie to my face every day." As I desperately tried to explain and defend myself, Daniel appeared in the doorway of our bedroom. His expression was a perfect mask of sympathy and concern, though I caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes when Melissa was not looking. "Melissa, I think I should drive you to Amber's now," he said gently. "Jason, you need to give her space. This is not the time to make things worse. You did this," I said, the realization crystallizing as I looked at my brother. "You made all of this up." Daniel's face hardened momentarily before he composed himself. "See, Melissa, he is going to blame everyone but himself. Classic Jason, never taking responsibility." Melissa grabbed her suitcase, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot do this right now. I need to go." As she walked out with Daniel, I stood frozen, my mind racing to understand how my brother could have orchestrated such an elaborate betrayal. When I tried to follow them, Melissa turned and delivered the final blow. "Do not call me or come to find me. It is over, Jason. I never want to see you again." The door closed behind them, leaving me alone in an apartment, suddenly emptied of the future I had imagined. I spent hours searching for the alleged evidence of my infidelity, finding nothing. Daniel did not return that night, nor did he respond to my increasingly desperate messages. The next day, I went to Amber's apartment, hoping to speak with Melissa, only to be told she did not want to see me. When I asked what evidence Daniel had shown her, Amber uncomfortably explained that he had presented text messages, photos, and even a recorded phone conversation that seemed to prove I was involved with another woman. The voice on the phone call was definitely yours. Jason, Amber said apologetically. I heard it myself. You were making plans to meet this Amanda person while Melissa was at work. I felt physically ill. Daniel had apparently gone to extraordinary lengths to destroy my relationship, even creating fake recordings. When I insisted the evidence had been fabricated, Amber looked at me with pity rather than belief. Over the next week, I made countless attempts to reach Melissa, each one rejected. I left voicemails explaining the truth, sent emails detailing Daniel's history of manipulation, and even wrote a letter cataloging every minute of my time at the conference, with witnesses who could verify my whereabouts. None of it mattered. The narrative had been established, and I had been cast as the villain. The final blow came when my mother called, her voice tight with disappointment. Daniel told us what happened, she said. We raised you better than this, Jason. How could you cheat on someone as wonderful as Melissa? Even my own parents had accepted Daniel's lie without question. When I tried to explain that he had manufactured the evidence, my mother sighed. Daniel is trying to support Melissa through this difficult time, she said. You need to accept responsibility for your actions instead of blaming your brother. The betrayal was complete. I had lost not only the woman I loved, but also the support of my family, all due to an elaborate deception orchestrated by my own brother. What I did not yet understand was why Daniel had gone to such lengths to destroy my happiness, or how deeply his deception would continue to unfold in the weeks to come. The following month passed in a fog of confusion and grief. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to focus on publishing deadlines, while my personal life had imploded so spectacularly. I moved out of the apartment Melissa, and I had shared finding a small studio across town that I could afford on my own. The space felt temporary and hollow, much like my state of mind. Friends who had known us as a couple chose sides, most believing the compelling evidence Daniel had presented. A few remained neutral, uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to cut ties completely with either of us. Only my college roommate Travis openly questioned the narrative. It just does not sound like you, he said during one of his check-in calls. And Daniel has always been well complicated when it comes to your achievements. Travis's skepticism gave me the first glimmer of hope I had felt since the breakup. If one person could see through the deception, perhaps others eventually would too. With this small encouragement, I began methodically documenting everything I could remember about the days surrounding the accusation, creating a timeline of events, and identifying potential witnesses who could verify my whereabouts. Meanwhile, social media provided a painful window into what happened after Melissa left. Within 2 weeks, photos appeared, showing her and Daniel together at a concert, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. By the 1-month mark, their relationship status had officially changed online, confirmed by congratulatory comments from mutual friends who apparently saw nothing wrong with my brother dating my ex-girlfriend so soon after our breakup. My parents, who had always favored Daniel, accepted the new relationship with uncomfortable enthusiasm. Melissa is still like family to us, my mother explained during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, and she and Daniel have always had such a strong connection. This revisionist history was perhaps the most painful aspect of the betrayal. The narrative had shifted to suggest that Daniel and Melissa had always shared a special bond, one that I had somehow interfered with rather than preceded. My 3-year relationship was being rewritten before my eyes. Through careful questioning of coworkers and conference attendees, I managed to collect statements confirming my presence at every session and evening event during the publishing conference. I obtained hotel security footage showing me entering my room alone each night and leaving alone each morning. I even secured copies of my phone records, proving I had made no calls to anyone named Amanda or any unknown numbers during that period. The evidence exonerating me was substantial, but ultimately meaningless without someone willing to consider it. Melissa had blocked my number and email. My parents deflected any attempt to discuss the situation in detail. Friends uncomfortable with the drama had stepped back from both sides. I had the truth, but no audience willing to hear it. The turning point came unexpectedly through Amber, Melissa's closest friend, and the person who had initially confirmed seeing Daniel's fabricated evidence. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice hesitant. "Something weird happened," she began. Daniel was using Melissa's laptop and left his email open when she went to take a shower. She saw some messages that did not make sense. Something about payments to an actress named Amanda Winters. My heart raced as Amber continued explaining that Melissa had not confronted Daniel yet, but had begun having doubts about the evidence he had presented. The screenshots he had shown of my alleged text conversations had disappeared from his phone when she asked to see them again. The hotel receipt he had produced had inconsistencies she had not noticed initially. "I am not saying I believe you completely," Amber clarified, "but some things are not adding up. Melissa is starting to ask questions." This was the first crack in Daniel's carefully constructed deception, and it gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I asked Amber if she would be willing to look at the evidence I had collected, not to convince Melissa, but to satisfy her own doubts. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet the following day. Our meeting at a quiet coffee shop lasted nearly 3 hours, as I methodically presented my timeline, witness statements, phone records, and hotel footage. Amber reviewed everything carefully, asking pointed questions and taking notes. "If what you are showing me is genuine, and I believe it is," she said finally, "then Daniel went to extraordinary lengths to separate you and Melissa. The question is why?" It was a question I had been grappling with since the beginning. Daniel and I had our issues growing up, but this level of calculated destruction seemed beyond sibling rivalry or jealousy. Something deeper and more disturbing was at work. "There is one more thing you should know," Amber said as we were leaving. "I did some digging after seeing those emails. Amanda Winters is an aspiring actress who does small commercial work. I found her profile online and messaged her directly. She confirmed that she was paid $500 to pose for photos and record a phone conversation with a script. She was told it was for a surprise anniversary video. The confirmation that Daniel had actually hired someone to create false evidence left me feeling simultaneously validated and sickened. The elaborate nature of his deception suggested a level of premeditation that was difficult to comprehend. My own brother had invested significant time, money, and energy into destroying my relationship. What neither of us knew then was that Amanda Winters would prove to be just the first thread in unraveling a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond my situation. Daniel's deception was about to be exposed in ways that would shake not just my family, but an entire network of relationships he had manipulated over years. 2 days after my meeting with Amber, she called again with news that changed everything. She had convinced Melissa to look more deeply into Daniel's claims, starting with reaching out to Amanda Winters directly. The actress had not only confirmed being hired to play a role in what she thought was a harmless prank, but had provided copies of the payment transaction and the original script Daniel had given her. "Melissa is devastated," Amber reported. "She confronted Daniel last night with the evidence. He denied everything at first, then tried to claim it was a misunderstanding. When she showed him the emails and payment confirmation, he finally admitted what he had done." According to Amber, Daniel's confession had come with justifications rather than genuine remorse. He had claimed he was protecting Melissa from eventual heartbreak, insisting he knew I would hurt her eventually. When pressed about his real motivations, he had become defensive and eventually stormed out of her apartment. "She wants to talk to you," Amber said. "She is ready to hear your side of everything." The prospect of finally being heard after weeks of rejection filled me with conflicting emotions, relief that the truth was emerging, anxiety about facing Melissa again, and a simmering anger toward Daniel that threatened to overwhelm all of Perieston. Other feelings. I agreed to meet Melissa the following evening at a neutral location, a park where we had often spent Sunday afternoons during happier times. She was already seated on our usual bench when I arrived, her posture tense and eyes red from crying. The sight of her still produced an ache in my chest, a mixture of longing and hurt that had not diminished despite everything that had happened. "I am so sorry, Jason," she began immediately. "I should have trusted you. I should have at least listened when you tried to explain." Her apology was sincere, but did little to address the fundamental breach that had occurred. She had been willing to believe the worst about me based on evidence from someone who had clear motivation to separate us. More painfully, she had moved directly from our relationship into one with Daniel, a transition that still made no sense to me. "I need to understand how it happened," I said quietly. "Not just believing the lies, but everything after. Being with him so quickly." Melissa looked away, visibly uncomfortable. "He was there when I was at my lowest point, convinced that our entire relationship had been a lie. He presented himself as the one person who truly understood and cared about me. I was vulnerable, and he knew exactly what to say and do." As we talked for over 2 hours, a clearer picture emerged of Daniel's manipulation. After orchestrating our breakup, he had positioned himself as Melissa's primary support system, isolating her from friends who might question his narrative and feeding her carefully crafted stories about my past behavior. He had created an alternate reality in which he was her protector, and I was a habitual liar who had deceived everyone for years. Looking back, there were red flags I ignored, she admitted. He was constantly checking my phone, getting upset if I mentioned reconnecting with mutual friends, particularly those who were still in contact with you. He would say things like, "I just do not want you to be hurt again," or "I am trying to protect you," but it was really about control. The Daniel she described was calculating and manipulative in ways that went beyond even my understanding of my brother. This was not impulsive behavior or poor judgment, but sustained strategic deception designed to get what he wanted, regardless of who was hurt in the process. "There is more," Melissa said hesitantly. "After I confronted him, I started talking to other women he had dated before. There is a pattern, Jason. He has done similar things before, creating conflicts between people to position himself as the solution to problems he engineered. One of his ex-girlfriends told me he fabricated evidence that her best friend was saying terrible things about her behind her back, destroying their friendship just before he needed a place to stay and moved in with her. This revelation should have been shocking, but instead it created a terrible clarity. Fragments of past situations suddenly aligned into a recognizable pattern: incidents where friendships or relationships around Daniel had mysteriously imploded, often resulting in some advantage for him. I had attributed these situations to bad luck or poor judgment in choosing friends. Now, I had to consider a much darker possibility that my brother was systematically manipulating people for his own benefit. As our conversation drew to a close, Melissa asked the question that hung between us. "Where do we go from here? Can you ever forgive me for not trusting you?" It was a question I was not prepared to answer. The betrayal had been too profound, the hurt too fresh. Moreover, her relationship with Daniel, however it had been initiated, had been real. They had shared weeks together while I suffered alone, believing I had lost everything. "I need time," I said finally. "I am grateful that you were willing to look for the truth eventually, but a lot of damage has been done. I cannot just pick up where we left off." She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I understand. For what it is worth, it is completely over with Daniel. Even before I discovered the truth, things were falling apart. The person he pretended to be with me does not exist. We parted with a tentative agreement to talk again after we had both had time to process everything. As I walked away, I felt the first real sense of vindication since the nightmare began, but it brought less satisfaction than I had imagined. The truth had emerged, but it could not undo the weeks of pain or restore unquestioning trust. What remained was the most difficult question: what to do about Daniel and the web of deception he had woven throughout our family. The family confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house, a setting that had once represented safety but now felt like contested territory. I had requested the meeting after learning that Daniel had preemptively told our parents a new version of events, claiming that Melissa had misunderstood some harmless jokes and was making false accusations because their relationship had ended badly. I arrived prepared, carrying a folder with printouts of Amanda Winter's statement payment receipts and the script Daniel had created for the fake phone conversation. My mother greeted me with obvious discomfort, while my father maintained a stiff formality that suggested he was reserving judgment until he heard both sides. Daniel arrived late, his usual strategy for controlling situations. He appeared relaxed and slightly amused, as if the whole matter were a minor misunderstanding rather than a deliberate campaign of destruction. The contrast between his casual demeanor and the devastation he had caused only intensified my determination to expose the full extent of his actions. I think we all need to have an honest conversation about what happened between me, Melissa, and Daniel. I began, once we were all seated in the living room. Jason has been having a hard time accepting that Melissa chose me. Daniel interjected, immediately establishing his preferred narrative before I could present any evidence. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, but you cannot control who you fall for. The practiced sincerity in his voice was so convincing that for a moment I understood how easily others had believed his lies. He had perfected the art of sounding reasonable while completely distorting reality. That is not what happened, and you know it, I responded, opening the folder and placing Amanda Winter's signed statement on the coffee table. You hired an actress to pretend to be involved with me. You created fake text messages and a recorded phone call. You deliberately destroyed my relationship so you could step in. My parents' expressions shifted as they read the statement, my mother's hand moving to cover her mouth in shock. Daniel's facade cracked momentarily before he recovered. This is ridiculous, he scoffed. Anyone could create a fake statement. That is why I brought these as well. I continued placing the payment receipts and emails between Daniel and Amanda on the table. And Amanda is willing to speak to you directly if you have any doubts. As the evidence mounted, Daniel's strategy changed. He became the victim, claiming he had genuinely believed I was cheating on Melissa based on things he had overheard and had only been trying to protect her. When that explanation failed to gain traction, he suggested he had mental health issues that required understanding rather than condemnation. I have been struggling, he said, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. I need help, not judgment. My father, always quick to excuse Daniel's behavior, seemed ready to accept this explanation, but my mother surprised me by holding firm. If you are struggling, we will get you help, she said quietly. But that does not change what you did or make it acceptable. You deliberately hurt your brother and Melissa with calculated lies. That goes beyond sibling rivalry or poor judgment. For the first time in our lives, my mother was holding Daniel truly accountable, and the shock of it seemed to genuinely destabilize him. His carefully constructed persona crumbled, revealing flashes of the manipulation and anger that normally remained hidden beneath charm and excuses. You always took his side anyway, he snapped, abandoning the contrite act entirely. Perfect Jason, who never does anything wrong. Do you have any idea what it is like living in his shadow? He gets everything without even trying. Melissa was just one thing I wanted for myself. The raw honesty of this outburst silenced the room. Here finally was the truth beneath the deception, a lifetime of perceived unfairness that Daniel had never directly expressed but had acted on in increasingly destructive ways. I never saw it that way, I said after a moment. I always thought you were the favorite, the one they worried about and made allowances for. I spent my life helping you, covering for you, supporting you, and you repaid me by deliberately destroying my happiness. My father, who had remained largely silent, finally spoke. We have failed both of you in different ways, he said heavily. Daniel, we let you avoid consequences and responsibilities because we thought we were protecting you. Jason, we placed unfair burdens on you and took your stability for granted. Neither was right, but nothing justifies what you did, Daniel. The conversation continued for hours, painful but necessary. Daniel alternated between defiance, manipulation, and glimpses of genuine remorse as his carefully constructed narratives collapsed around him. My parents, confronted with evidence they could not dismiss, began the difficult process of recognizing their role in enabling his behavior over many years. By evening's end, several things had been decided. Daniel would begin therapy to address the underlying issues driving his manipulative behavior. He would move out of my parents' house, where he had been staying since Melissa asked him to leave, and take responsibility for supporting himself financially for the first time in his adult life. Most importantly, he would have no contact with me until significant progress had been made in addressing his behavior. As I drove home that night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication that the truth had finally been acknowledged, grief for the family dynamic that might never fully heal, and a strange sense of freedom. The burden of always being the responsible one of protecting Daniel from his own actions had been lifted. Whatever came next would be on new terms, with clearer boundaries and more honest communication. What I did not yet know was whether Melissa would be part of that future, or whether some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt regardless of intentions. 6 months passed before I had any direct contact with Daniel. During that time, I focused on rebuilding my life on my own terms. I returned to work with renewed focus, earning a promotion that allowed me to lead editorial projects I was passionate about. I reconnected with friends who had distanced themselves during the drama, many of whom offered apologies for doubting me. Most significantly, I began to examine the patterns in my own life that had made me vulnerable to manipulation and too quick to sacrifice my needs for others. My relationship with my parents entered a period of careful reconstruction. They made efforts to understand how their parenting had contributed to the unhealthy dynamic between Daniel and me, attending family therapy sessions and becoming more conscious of their tendencies to enable his behavior while expecting constant stability from me. These changes came too late to prevent the damage that had been done, but they offered hope that future interactions might be healthier. Melissa and I maintained limited contact during this period. We occasionally met for coffee or spoke by phone, cautiously navigating the complicated territory between our past intimacy and current uncertainty. The trust that had been broken could not be instantly restored, but the connection between us remained meaningful to both of us. "I miss what we had," she admitted during one of our conversations, "but I understand if we cannot go back to that." "I am not sure what is possible for us," I responded honestly. "I care about you, but rebuilding trust takes time, and I need to be sure about what I want going forward." As for Daniel, reports came through my parents that he was consistently attending therapy and had maintained steady employment for the first time in his adult life. According to his therapist, he was beginning to recognize patterns of manipulation and entitlement that had driven his behavior, though the road to genuine change would be long and uncertain. The eventual meeting between Daniel and me was suggested by his therapist as part of his recovery process. We met at a neutral location, a community park with plenty of open space and other people around. The brother who approached me that day looked different, somehow less confident in his charm, but more grounded in reality. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began, without preamble. "I know you had every right to refuse." We sat on a bench overlooking a children's playground, a reminder of simpler times when our conflicts had been about toys and parental attention, rather than elaborate deceptions and betrayal. "I have spent months working to understand why I did what I did to you," and Melissa Daniel continued when I did not immediately respond. "The easy explanation is jealousy, but it was more complicated than that. I spent my whole life feeling like I was living in your shadow, like nothing I did was ever enough compared to you. Instead of working harder or finding my own path, I developed this pattern of taking shortcuts and manipulating situations to get what I wanted." His self-awareness was surprising and somewhat disarming. This was not the charming deflection I had expected, but something that sounded closer to genuine insight. "Melissa was not even about Melissa." "Not really," he admitted. "She was something you had that I convinced myself I deserved more. The fact that I hurt both of you so deeply for such a selfish reason is something I have to live with now." "Why should I believe anything you say?" I asked the question that had been at the center of my hesitation about this meeting. "You have always been able to say what people want to hear." Daniel nodded, acknowledging the validity of my doubt. "You should not believe me. Based on this conversation, words are easy, and I have used them as weapons for too long. The only thing that matters now is consistent action over time. I do not expect forgiveness or even another chance at brotherhood. I just wanted you to know that I am finally facing what I have done and who I have been." We talked for over an hour, covering territory that had been off limits throughout our lives, the resentments, misunderstandings, and family dynamics that had shaped both of us in different ways. There were no miraculous breakthroughs or emotional embraces, just the beginning of a more honest understanding between two people who shared history and blood, but had become strangers in many ways. As we prepared to part, Daniel handed me an envelope. My therapist suggested I write this as part of making amends. You do not have to read it now or ever. It is not an attempt to change your mind about me, just an effort to take full responsibility for what I did. The letter remained unopened in my desk drawer for weeks afterward. A tangible symbol of a chapter I was not yet ready to fully close or move beyond. During this period of personal reconstruction, Melissa and I continued our cautious reconnection. As the wounds from Daniel's deception gradually healed, we began to rediscover what had drawn us together. Initially, the easy conversations, shared interests, and fundamental compatibility that had made our relationship meaningful before. Betrayal shattered it. "I have been thinking about us," she said one evening, as we walked through the university campus where we had first met. "About whether we could start again, not where we left off, but something new that acknowledges everything that happened." The question hung between us, weighted with possibilities and risks. The easier path would have been to keep the past firmly behind us, to find other partners without the complicated history we shared. Yet the connection between us remained undeniable, perhaps even strengthened by the challenges we had weathered separately and together. "I think we would need to build something different," I replied carefully, "with clearer boundaries and more direct communication, and it would take time." She nodded, understanding the caution behind my words. "Time is something I am willing to invest, if you are." That conversation marked the beginning of a deliberate rebuilding, not a continuation of our previous relationship, but the careful construction of something new. We established agreements about honesty, space, and expectations that might have seemed overly structured to outsiders, but provided the security we both needed after betrayal. Today, 2 years after Daniel's deception was exposed, much has changed in all our lives. Melissa and I are engaged, planning a small ceremony that celebrates not just our love, but the resilience and wisdom gained through difficult experiences. Our relationship is stronger for having been broken and mindfully reconstructed, with an appreciation for trust that only comes from understanding its fragility. My relationship with Daniel remains complicated, but has evolved into something more authentic than the facade that existed before. He continues his therapeutic work and has maintained the positive changes in his life, developing healthier relationships and finding legitimate success in his music career after years of unfocused efforts. We will never return to unquestioning brotherhood, but we have established a cautious relationship based on current actions rather than shared history or family obligation. My parents, confronted with the consequences of their parenting patterns, have made genuine efforts to develop more balanced relationships with both their sons. They still struggle sometimes with old habits, particularly in crisis situations, but the awareness they have developed has created space for more honest family dynamics. The letter Daniel gave me that day in the park finally found its way out of my desk drawer 6 months after our meeting. Its contents, a detailed accounting of his actions and their impact without excuses or justification, provided a kind of closure I had not realized I needed. It sits now in a box with other documents from that difficult period, a reminder of both human capacity for deception and the possibility of genuine change. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you handle the aftermath and decide whether to rebuild the relationship or create necessary distance? Share your story in the comments below to help others who might be facing similar situations right now. If this journey of betrayal, truth, and careful reconciliation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex human relationships. Share this video with someone who might be struggling to trust again after betrayal, and remember that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds. Thank you for listening to my story of brotherhood betrayal and the long, difficult path toward truth and recovery.